Hi everyone, we're going to talk about Tier 2 interventions in social skill instruction. First, I just want to kind of highlight that this is with the assumption of universal social skill instruction going on within your school, so expectations are being taught. I also wanted to highlight that Tier 2 social skills groups are just for more frequent and intensive practice and feedback. It's not really for students who are engaging in violent or dangerous behaviors, although it could be, an add-on to more intensive social skills instruction. But Tier 2 is really for students who require more practice, maybe broken down more discreetly, such as social interactions, students becoming easily frustrated, emotional regulation, and distractibility, blurting, etc. So there's a few really good resources out there. We have the Social Skills Improvement System, and that's a pretty comprehensive curriculum that has a built-in assessment with lessons that match. There's also Second Step, which is broken down by grade level. It's pretty scripted. The language is cumulative, so it builds upon each year and can be taught at the Tier 1 level as well, which I really like in the universal level. Teachers can embed them in their morning meetings and routines, and there's little follow-up mini lessons throughout the week that they can use. There's also skills streaming, which gives you skills cards, more of a task analysis. There's also an assessment, parent checklist. Some have student manuals. It's evidence-based with the teaching skills, with modeling, role-playing, guided feedback. And there's a sample on Blackboard for you of a skills card. I don't really have too much experience with Project Achieve or PATHS, although I do know that PATHS incorporates music. So something that we need to keep in mind with these curriculum is that Tier 2 is targeted. So we're pulling from a particular curriculum to practice or teach. So just like I had just spoken about, most social skills studies deliver a treatment to children with an almost complete disregard for the types of social skills deficits children may have. So if a student needs practice with initiation of conversation, we don't want to have them participating in a social skills group based around organization, okay, just for an example. We need to consider whether there's an acquisition or a performance deficit. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But acquisition deficit is a student's never used it. A performance deficit is they can do it, but maybe they need practice to improve it. So this is pretty easily identified. So, for example, I know what a piano is. I know how to, touch the keys, but I've never really played it. I don't know how to play a full song. I have an acquisition deficit there. Whereas I could know how to play a song, but I might need a little bit more practice. So there's their performance deficit. There's also performance versus fluency. So a lot of teachers have said, well, I've seen him do it, so I know he can do it. What we really need to think about is under, if 4 out of 5 days a student has an altercation with peers during lunchtime, but you observe him one of those 5 days, expressing developmentally appropriate language and following those social norms, etc., you wouldn't want to build your goal off that one day. So you want your goals to be based on typical performance rather than just once in a while performance. There's also competing behaviors that we need to take into consideration. So this is choosing the behavior to get the needs met. So maybe the environment might need to be structured so that the more pro-social behavior is reinforced more. And we can talk about that a little bit as well. So some social skills basics. Social skills curriculum must match the specific need, especially at Tier 2 because it is targeted. An ideal curriculum does not exist. It's really hard to address all the needs, and we need to identify through observational or data collection. So we might need to be able to pick and choose from different curricula, maybe set up a few different lessons from a few different programs to meet the needs of those students. And initially, learning how to teach social skills takes time and energy, but it's really not difficult. It does not need to be a specialist that delivers these social skills groups. A lot of the curriculum is very scripted. You can have a paraprofessional or a classroom teacher running these. You can also have little lunch bunch groups within your school, and it can really help you to build capacity within your school because they are not hard to teach. Let's talk a little bit about competing problem behaviors. Competing problem behaviors are behaviors that compete with, interfere with, or block either the acquisition or performance of social skills. So we see a lot of these competing behaviors, externalizing behaviors, bullying, hyperactivity or inattention, which we often see, internalizing behaviors, autism spectrum disorder, in the way that manifests itself behaviorally. So we need to use the matching law because it's helpful in conceptualizing relationships between social skills and competing problem behaviors. In a couple of slides, we're going to look at the definitions for these competing problem behaviors. Let's talk about the matching law. What is it? So matching law deals with the choice of behaviors. So it states that the relative rate of behavior matches the relative rate of reinforcement for that behavior. So for example, aggressive behavior is reinforced every 3 times it occurs, and pro-social behavior is reinforced every 15 times it occurs. Matching would predict that aggressive behavior would be chosen 5 times more frequently than pro-social behavior. Social skills training should be conceptualized as replacement behavior training. It teaches positive replacement behaviors or social skills that result in the same consequence as the competing problem behavior, teaching functionally equivalent behaviors. So for example, if a student is yelling to essentially get kicked out of a classroom because he doesn't want to, or maybe he just needs a break and he's yelling because that he knows gets him kicked out of the classroom. He's going to yell versus asking for a break. So if he yells, he's immediately kicked out of the classroom and he gets to take his break. Whereas if he's asking for a break in the pro-social form, he may be less likely to actually get a break. So we need to be able to match or even provide even more reinforcement for the pro-social behavior. So every time he asks for a break, you should be able to provide that break to him. So we're teaching those strategies and they need to be reinforced as much or more as the problem behavior. So again, here's the examples of competing problem behavior. So externalizing or fighting with others, talking back to adults, bullying. So you can read those at your leisure. But these are all taken from the SSIS screening that we did in the beginning of this class. And then down at the bottom, there's autism spectrum, which has ritualized behaviors or becoming upset when routine is changed. So these are all taken from that screener. Social skills are primarily learned behaviors, which we know. Deficits can be acquisition can't do or performance won't do problems. They're comprised of specific and discrete verbal and nonverbal behaviors. They include both initiation and responses. They're interactive by nature, so it requires a speaker and a listener. They're highly contextual, so the setting, what is appropriate in one setting might not be appropriate in another. So for example, language that you use at home is sometimes not appropriate at school or work. So contextual social skills. And deficits and competing problem behaviors can be identified and treated. And the earlier we identify and treat these behaviors, the better. So here's another way that we can think of acquisition deficit versus performance deficit and how to, quote unquote, treat them. So if you have competing problem behavior present, and it's an acquisition deficit, you want to teach the social skill and remove the competing behaviors. Okay, so you're going to want to build a plan to remove those competing behaviors. However, if there's no competing behavior present, then you would just teach the social skill. If it's a performance deficit, so can do it, but he won't do it, you want to differentiate the reinforcement of the social skill. So you want to reinforce that highly and remove competing behaviors if there are competing behaviors. And obviously, if there are no competing behaviors present in a performance deficit, you would just differentiate the reinforcement of the social skill. Okay. Reflecting and processing is good. So pre-teaching and guided practice with feedback is better. And don't build doing it wrong into the learning chain. So this is really important. We really like to give really rich examples, and with those come non-examples. And it's appropriate for adults to model the non-examples, but we don't ever want the students to model those non-examples, because what that does is it allows them to practice the unwanted behavior. And when that's done, sometimes it's reinforced. Those non-examples can sometimes be really silly, and other students might get a giggle out of it, and that would reinforce that kind of behavior. And thereby it would be more apt for the student to practice that behavior rather than pro-social behavior. So again, we have the steps of a behavioral lesson plan. Explain expectations and why they're needed, why they're necessary. Check for understanding and buy-in. Model examples, check for understanding and buy-in. Model non-examples, so this is the teacher. Also check for understanding and buy-in, see a pattern here. Model examples and have the students practice. And you give some guided feedback along the way. So some cautions regarding social skills instruction. So address generalization and maintenance issues. Failure to adequately program for generalization and maintenance. So you want to address these social skills under a variety of settings. It's widely recommended that students have, shorter blips of social skill instruction. For example, 10 minutes per day rather than, 50 minutes in a big chunk of time per week. So you want to be able to practice these and generalize them within the day, and then also maintain them. So have frequent check-ins for these skills. Failure to match instructional procedures to specific types of deficits. So like I talked about earlier, the matching rule, you want to make sure that you're matching your intervention to the actual deficit rather than putting a student through a whole curriculum for social skills if they only need a little piece of it. Failure to target socially valid behaviors. So you want to be able to target, what are the behaviors, what are the pro-social behaviors, and that yield the same function. So what are the pro-social behaviors that are going to get the student what they were trying to get in the first place? So the yelling out example. If you're teaching a student how to ask for a break appropriately, that matches the same function. Functional approach is needed to program for generalization and maintenance. We just talked about that. One reason so many socially skilled behaviors fail to generalize is the newly taught skill is masked or overpowered by older and stronger competing behaviors. So that's an efficiency problem. So the behavior is so effective, the yelling out is so effective that it masks the newly taught skill. So this really requires a lot of communication with the teacher to be very transparent on this is the skill that's being taught, this was the function of the behavior, so we have to reinforce this new skill even more so than the competing behavior was reinforced. So that's all I have for you for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. If not, have a great week, and I will see you on the boards.